It is the most wonderful time of the year because the Thanksgiving 3-game DFS slate is just around the corner. And honestly, three at least decent games, better than a lot of Thanksgiving slates we've had in the recent past. So pretty jacked up to break down Thursday's 3-game FanDuel DFS slate. We're going to do that for today, talking about general short slate strategy. We're going to break down all 3 games and outline our top plays on FanDuel for this week. This is the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and FanDuel Research. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a managing editor of digital media for FanDuel Research, joined here as I am for all previous shows by Brandon Gdula. Check him out on Twitter at Gdula13. Find his work at FanDuel Research, where he is a senior managing editor. Brandon, happy Thanksgiving to you. How you doing today?
I'm good. It's always fun to break down the Thanksgiving slate. It always feels like it'll go a little bit quicker, but we dig in 2 games at a level that we don't for the main slate. So ends up taking a while, but we talk about everyone. We talk about why. And you want to start off your Thanksgiving right. So can't just blow through these games too quickly, right?
That's right. And honestly, they're fun games to dissect. So I think that there are fun plays in the slate. And the question will be, how do we rank the prioritization of the studs? Because we've got Dak Prescott, Christian McCaffrey, CeeDee Lamb. You can get all 3, but it's not fun for the rest of your lineup. So we're going to break down how to prioritize those guys, whether you should just jam in all 3, and general rankings of these guys, getting you ready for Thanksgiving here in just 1 second. But first, quick scheduling announcement for this week. We have our Week 12 preview show for the full slate on Sunday. Will be up on Wednesday. That'll be recorded live on the FanDuel YouTube page at noon Eastern, similar to today. So FanDuel, YouTube, noon Eastern tomorrow for the full Week 11 or Week 12 slate breakdown. Then up on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed and the FanDuel YouTube page after the fact. Also, if you want some betting thoughts for not just Thanksgiving, but for other games as well, we'll have Covering the Spread tomorrow with Dr. Ed Feng for both college football and the NFL. I broke down my initial thoughts on the Week 12 spreads and totals on Covering the Spread this morning. That is already up on the Covering the Spread podcast feed, FanDuel TV Plus, and the FanDuel YouTube page. And we'll also have Tom Vecchio, Primetime Tom, breaking down top player props for all 3 Thanksgiving Day games on the Covering the Spread podcast feed and FanDuel TV Plus tomorrow. So a lot of stuff here on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. A lot of stuff on Covering the Spread. Make sure you're subscribed in both areas to get those shows as they go live. Thanksgiving calls for family, food, and football. And with 3 marquee matchups in the NFL on Thursday, FanDuel's giving you the opportunity to win a share of $1 million in prizes, with first place getting $200,000, all for just a $9 entry fee. All you got to do is put together your best 9-player roster while staying under the salary cap. Then use FanDuel's live scoring. Follow along as you compete for the top prize with your choice of stars like Dak Prescott, Christian McCaffrey, and Amon-Ra St. Brown, all set to take the field on Thursday. There are plenty of big names to use in your lineup. Turkey Day is coming up quickly, so head over to FanDuel and get your lineups today. Eligibility restrictions apply. Go to FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app for more details. I'm sorry I called the Turkey Day, Brandon. My apologies. Pizza Day? I don't know. What's the alternative here? What do I go with if I'm trying to be inclusive for you?
We are doing sweet potato quesadillas.
Sweet potato quesadilla day. There you go. Rolls right off the tongue. We're going to get into the games here in a second, but I think it's important because typically we're doing these shows for full slates, and those are a very different beast than a 3-game slate. So I want to talk in general about small slate strategy. And you went back through looking at the past Thanksgiving DFS slate since FanDuel added the flex position back in 2018 and kind of ran through some trends that popped up. So I want to give you the floor to kind of run through what you found when looking through those slates and what it means for this year's slate as well.
Yeah, so I mean, we got to take this with a grain of salt. It's 4 slates because we didn't have 3 games back in 2020, which I remember, but I forgot that game got pushed the whole way to Wednesday. The Steelers and Ravens game. Yeah. But look, it's 4 slates, but also I think that we can kind of learn a thing or two anyway, because what I found was pretty logical. But one thing, there are basically 2 big takeaways. Well, you can get into the weeds with this kind of stuff, and then it's hard to remember it, hard to apply it. 2 things I think at least worth mentioning. It definitely feels like, and I feel this way, like a backup tight end scores in that Lions game, you feel like your whole day is ruined because you got to be perfect. You don't have to be perfect. So I pulled the Thanksgiving million winning lineups and the perfect lineups for these slates. So I kind of have like 8 lineups to break down. There's naturally a lot of overlap between those, but perfect lineups on these slates average 26 more FanDuel points than the lineup that actually won the Thanksgiving million. That's, cherry picking the absolute perfect lineup you could have possibly built. So there's still a lot of room for error. And again, your goal should be, if you're playing tournaments, to get that top lineup. But even if you don't, like, there's still a lot of wiggle room to have a good day. So don't feel like you got to get everything exactly right just to have a good day. But the more important one, the second point I want to make, is kind of dispelling the notion that it only takes one, whatever that means to you. Um, but there's a lot of volume that goes into making a perfect lineup or a winning lineup, even on just a 3-game slate. That's 6 teams. Some of them don't have great implied team totals. We've seen similar slates in the past, but if you take the 32 skill players, so quarterback, running back, receiver, and tight end, out of these 4 lineups, in the perfect lineups, 30 of them, so 94%, played at least half of their team snaps offensively in these games. 27 of them, so 84%, played at least 60% of the snaps. As for the tournament winning lineups, the ones where you had a little more wiggle room, didn't have to be perfect to make the perfect lineup. 29 of them played at least 50% of the snaps. 26 played at least 60% of the snaps. So very similar. Again, similar lineups, a little bit different. But even if you give people some leeway for having imperfect lineups, but still, great lineups, you need to play a lot of snaps, even on these smaller slates. If you look at carries plus your targets, so just your opportunities among these 28 players, so removing the quarterbacks here, 24 of 28, so 86%, had at least 5 opportunities, which it's not going to blow you away. But the average is 11.9. The 4 outliers, the ones who didn't have at least 5 opportunities, or, not touches, but, throw in the targets there. 3 of them were tight ends, so that's explainable. And then Deshaun Jackson, who got over 100 yards and a touchdown on 4 targets. And then of the 9 running backs who were in the Thanksgiving million winning lineups, so aren't even the perfect lineups, all had at least 18 adjusted opportunities, which for me and Jim are carries plus double your targets, and the average is 25. So running back's not really the place you look for with backups and say, well, if someone just steals a touchdown, it's going to be enough. Ultimately, what this comes down to me, is on these Thanksgiving slates, you can get by with tight ends who don't have great workloads if they score. But the trap that I can always fall into is wide receivers and saying, hey, all it takes is one. If this guy scores or he has a 40-yard catch at a bare minimum salary, that's going to be enough. Historically, it's not enough. So I just want to make sure that we're not, because we're going to talk about a lot of receivers with improving roles or somewhat of a role. I still want to see like a majority snap rate, so over 50%, not the guys running 20% of the routes and say it only takes one. It's just not really the case, and I kind of wanted to get out in front of that this week.
So you're telling me I shouldn't use Jameson Williams? Is that the entire point?
Well, he's what, over half the snaps in 2 straight games?
Barely. Not by a lot.
But right. So it's one of those, we're gonna find plenty of players. And again, it comes down to the receivers, because running back doesn't work that way. Quarterback, obviously not. Tight end,
running back, we've got guys who will get volume at non-offensive salaries too.
Right.
So we'll be okay there.
Yeah. But it always comes down to those receivers and the thought of like a Rondale Moore this week. One play and a touchdown. That's not enough, even on that's not necessarily enough. Those 11 points. You're not going to turn it down at the salary necessarily, but you still want that volume.
Right. Even on a short slate, having a path to legitimate upside matters, and you can't get legitimate upside out of one play. I think that's the way that I would explain it personally. It's just you do need a bit more than that, and that's important. Am I still going to consider guys like Jameson Williams? Yes, I will.
Right.
Because like I have to at a certain point. But it's important to like keep in mind that those plays, even on a short slate, are suboptimal. Other thing I would say is that ceiling does still matter. Kind of reiterating the same thing, but like you want guys who can erase mistakes, because on a 3-game slate, you're more likely to have mistakes somewhere in your lineup. So I want to have guys who can erase mistakes. I used to say like, oh, on a short slate, you can emphasize floor more. And like you can, because like not every guy will have a path to upside the same way they would for a fuller slate. But I think that as I've gotten older, I've more realized that like it does still matter a lot to have those guys who can win you the slate by themselves. And I think there are guys who can do that on this slate, specifically CeeDee Lamb and Christian McCaffrey. I think are the guys that come to mind for me personally who can do that. So I want to make sure I'm prioritizing guys like that within my lineups. Any other thoughts for you on like small slate strategy as far as like things you do personally when playing these smaller slates, anything like that?
Stacking particular games, you can get a little bit more aggressive and have like 4 or 5 players in a game, and say like, I think in this iteration of how I view the slate, the whole like the 3-game slate playing out, Washington and Dallas is going to score 70 points, and the other 2 games aren't going to be that good. So I can get, I can play Sam Howell and Brian Robinson and like 2 of his pass catchers, just because there's not going to be points elsewhere. Yeah. You can look at it that way. Something that you always say is sort of tell yourself a story of how this will play out. You have to do that. If you just try to play like you can do it. Like you can play like the best one-off plays, but in a lot of cases, there's a lot of correlation on these smaller slates. So that's one thing that I'm more willing to do, is sort of overstack a game or a team.
Yeah, the tell yourself a story works 2 ways. It's both in like deciding which games shoot out, because there probably will be one. I think all 3 have a shot to go over this week, their totals. So like I think all 3 are pretty good games in general. But then also from a game script perspective, like I've got like the Commanders win odds in my model are just maybe not use them as an example. That might have been a bad one. Let's not use them. Seattle's win odds in my model are 20.9%. So like that, wow, that's also way below what in the world. Okay, so my model thinks that these won't be super. I don't know. Whatever. Even if we assume my model is a little aggressive, like even then, it's a 20.9% chance that Seattle wins, and so
yeah.
Keep that in mind. And that means that 20.9% of your lineups can have go in with the assumption of, okay, Seattle wins this game. How does that play out if that happens? Kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think another way to put sort of the similar thought there is every game has a big spread. Therefore, 3 teams have a pretty healthy implied team total. 3 have subpar implied team totals. And if you extrapolated this, say it's, 10 games, 20 teams, and 10 of them were favored by 7 or more, and like we would just pick from those teams. Yeah. On a 3-game slate, digging back, it's kind of hard to compare, but even if I scale things for the season or the slate average, in terms of implied team total, so the expected points scored based on like the total and the spread, you'll see players get into the perfect lineup from the teams with lower totals.
Yeah.
Because your salary's accounted for that. So you're going to have to consider the teams that could get blown out. And that's another change for us, because we try to avoid that on a bigger slate. So it's a little bit obvious. But I think I don't want to say aggressive, but being very receptive to imperfect situations is going to be something you have to do.
Especially if we want value running back, which we'll talk about as we get into the game. So let's start things off here by talking about the first game of the afternoon. That is the Packers at the Lions, or right now the Lions are favored by 7.5 at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total in this game is 46.5. Couple key injuries in this game. Big one is Aaron Jones, unlikely to play. He has a knee injury. Emmanuel Wilson also got banged up. He has a shoulder injury. So Packers pretty thin at running back. They did re-sign James Robinson to the practice squad and also re-sign Patrick Taylor. I think Taylor will probably be active this week. He was with the Patriots the past couple weeks, but has been with the Packers before that. He was the guy who they'd elevate from the practice squad when Jones was out earlier on this year. So I'd expect Taylor to be active. So keep that in mind with AJ Dillon. Also, Dontavian Wicks made some noise in week 11, but he's in concussion protocol and unlikely to play for this week. So, Brandon, Packers at Lions. Lions pretty heavily favored. Total is decently high. What do you see in this game? Your overall thoughts on Packers at Lions?
I think one of the hardest spots for me for the whole slate is going to include the Lions running backs,
Mm-hmm.
because they're two guys who have legitimate tangible upside. Jared Goff didn't have the best showing last week, and you
Easy.
know, I'm just
Easy.
saying,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
they may want to rely on the ground game a bit, and they have that ability. In their first meeting, this was before you just pulled up Jahmyr Gibbs, but before Gibbs had much of a. Why don't you look at his game against the
I'd
Packers?
rather not. Thank you.
Why not?
I don't want to.
What am I missing?
I don't want to look at it.
Okay, why not?
I'm
I don't
pulling up the good
understand.
one.
Yeah, no, I was talking about Montgomery.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Sorry.
I saw
Yeah,
that you pivoted.
it's down
Yeah,
here. Yeah.
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 32 carries, 121 yards, 3 touchdowns. Again, this was before the role shift for Jahmyr Gibbs, and before that got better. But after doing something like that and having Jared Goff again just not play his best, I would not be surprised if Detroit goes pretty run heavy, gives both Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs a good amount of work. But with Montgomery back, the role's actually been pretty heavily like the workloads, the rushing workloads at least, pretty similar. With Gibbs at 11 carries per game, and then in these two games with Montgomery back, Montgomery's at 12. But the snap rate again, and that's something that I put a lot of value in based on the research that I've done. 57% for Gibbs, 39% for Montgomery. And if Montgomery played 40% of the snaps historically, that's not going to be enough to make the perfect lineup or help you get into the sun. There are outliers, but the thing with Montgomery is he's got a good opportunity per snap rate. So like that's a little bit different. And I would also expect his role to scale back up as he comes back. But I'm really fearful because you could probably tell me that each of these guys goes for like 100 scrimmage yards and scores, and like they're both very viable. And I feel like because there's two of them, I might be underweight on both, and it's a little bit scary. So, what are your thoughts on these two in particular?
Well, you said they could go for 100 scrimmage yards and both score. They've both done exactly that, 95 plus in both games since
Yeah,
Montgomery came back. But they both had 95 plus yards and a touchdown in both games, which is absurd. And I agree with you where like that I could see that script playing out very easily because the Packers have faced a 46.5% pass rate on early downs so far this year. That is the second lowest mark in the entire league. Teams recognize they can run the ball on the Packers, and they've done so at an aggressive rate. And Dan Campbell and Ben Johnson have already shown they're happy to do that. And I think that they'll do the exact same here because they can. Like,
hmm
if you can get through this game, like just torching the Packers on the ground, why would you not do that? And I think they can do that. So that's why I'd agree with you, where I think that this is a pretty likely to be a pretty heavy Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery script. But like because of the workload they both gotten in their two games since Montgomery came back, they're still in play. Now, I think that similar to you said you're worried about being underweight. I am too. That means neither's in play for cash games for me. But it does mean I want to ask myself that question. What are the odds this player burns me for not using them? And for both these guys, it's decently high. And so for tournament lineups, I want to make sure I have one or the other in a decent number of lineups. I cannot prioritize them over Christian McCaffrey, which means I need to actively make sure my exposure to them is lower than it is with McCaffrey. But like, I can see the path for both. Gibbs in those two games, 11 carries, 5.5 targets, 103.5 yards in scrimmage, 39% red zone share. So the red zone share has been very good. And Montgomery, 30% red zone share, 12 carries and 1 target. So the workload is better for Gibbs because of the passing game work. But this script could be more of a Montgomery script. So I'm probably between the two, I'll probably lean 60-40 Gibbs, maybe 70-30
yeah.
Gibbs, but I want to have them in probably like 40 to 50% of lineups have one or the other. Is that kind of a fair breakdown for you?
I don't know how doable that is.
Yeah.
I guess, I mean, that depends on how much McCaffrey you're playing,
Yeah.
but it's a little tricky to get McCaffrey and one of these two in there. So
Hmm.
that's dependent. And look, we just discussed the upside for these two again. Detroit won this earlier season matchup 34-20. They had 211 rushing yards on 43 carries. Jared Goff threw 28 pass attempts, 2 sacks, so 30 dropbacks, 43 rush attempts, with Montgomery being just the focal point.
Hmm.
I'm not saying that he's going to be the one to get 30 carries and Gibbs is going to get 10 opportunities or something like that, but I just have a hard time thinking that they're going to move away from Montgomery. Um, I'd probably still lean like 60-40 Gibbs, like you said, maybe 65, maybe 70-30. Just because the you also get protected from a game script standpoint, although I
Right.
don't particularly anticipate that Detroit plays from behind, but weird things happen. It's the
Sure.
NFL. So I think we're on the same page where we both recognize the upside, also recognize the potential that maybe they're a little bit over salaried or fairly salaried, but there's not enough ways to get access to McCaffrey and CeeDee Lamb by playing these two. So I'm good with it. But does
Yeah.
this lower us on
Yes.
Amon-Ra St. Brown and the
That's what I was
pass
going to ask
catchers?
you.
Yeah.
Yes. It lowers me on Amon-Ra compared to CeeDee Lamb because I think the Cowboys are going to throw a lot in that game. So that's kind of like, I know we're talking about this game, but I think it's important to bring in that game because it impacts this a lot. Because if
This is
you
how
use Amon-Ra,
this is how
yeah,
this pod always goes. We try to
yeah,
keep it, but you can't keep it to one game.
no, definitely not. And like from a projection perspective, Amon-Ra is going to be pretty similar to CeeDee Lamb, and I get why, but I just feel like this game is going to be a lot more run heavy than that one is. So if I'm stacking one of them, it's going to be Cowboys Commanders over this one, and that means as a result, I'll be higher on CeeDee Lamb than Amon-Ra St. Brown. So St. Brown, very palatable play, still a guy you want to get to, but not going to be as big of a priority for me as you would have with the other guys. Now, that's not to say I will ignore the passing game entirely. We referenced Jameson Williams earlier on, and his role does seem to be expanding. His snap rate across the past 3 games has been 40%, 52%, and 65%. Had a touchdown call back against the Chargers, had a touchdown this past week. He's been somewhat effective. He has a 40% deep target share from week 7 on, which is since Jahmyr Gibbs returned. And with Williams being active, with Amon-Ra St. Brown active, 40% deep target share, they're playing indoors, so that those deep targets could be effective. Do I want to use a lot of Jameson Williams? No, because his role is very flimsy, and there are a lot of circumstances where he scores 0 points, but he can score touchdowns. He can get yardage, and on this slate, that's enough. I think the question is, if we're again contextualizing all of this, is how do you view him compared to a guy like Jackson Smith and Jigba, who is at a very similar salary at 54, has a better snap rate, but doesn't seem to have the same yardage juice that Williams has.
Yeah, in most instances, I'm gonna side with Jameson Williams there, because again, it's not that it only takes one; it's that he gets, he has more downfield work. So over the past 2 games, which is kind of a cherry picked sample where his like route rate's been kind of elevated, and hoping because you're playing him with the hopes that it stays around there or improves. Just 5 total targets, so 2.5 per game, but 2 per game, at least 10 yards downfield. So that's more of like if you give proper weight to targets, with the depth and the red zone, that kind of stuff, it's about 4 targets a game, which is sort of the cutoff of like the value of targets that I want is at least 4. And I think that there's a case for um, Williams just sort of getting more and more and more acclimated as this team is trending toward the postseason. So I see the case for it. Don't love it, and I definitely don't want to default to Jameson Williams in my main lineup because I think that the potential for like a 3 target game is too high to sort of put him in like primary play territory.
I agree with that. It's a situation where I want to make sure my roster rate is like capped. So like I agree with you where I prefer Williams over Smith and Jigba, but I will have pretty level exposures because I want to make sure I'm not overexposed to either of them from an individual player perspective.
What about Josh Reynolds?
No.
No?
I mentioned before the sample of them since Williams returned and with Gibbs and Amon-Ra active. So week 7 on, he has fewer targets per game than Williams, or a lower target share than Williams does. And his snap rate seems to be declining since Williams getting ramped up. Donovan Peoples-Jones there now. They traded for DPJ right after Reynolds had like a really key fumble, and I don't think that was a huge coincidence. Like I think a lot of the attention went to he was coming to replace Williams. I think it might have been more so Reynolds because his role has gotten a lot worse as the year has gone along.
I mean, it wasn't. He's still running routes. That's trending down a bit, but I don't think he's off the board. If you're taking the so here's the thing you got to ask yourself: what if Jared Goff has a great game? And the running backs don't do a ton, and you play Goff with Amon-Ra and Reynolds, and then what I would do in that instance is duplicate that lineup and play Goff, Amon-Ra, and Williams.
You are allowed to do that. You have the freedom to do so. I will not be joining you in that conquest. I get it. Totally fair. Not for me personally. Let's look at the Packers side of things. I talked before about how the Packers have faced a very high rush rate on early downs. The Lions have not. They've faced a 57% pass rate on early downs so far this year. Part of that is game script, but also we expect the script to be kind of similar for this week. A.J. Dillon coming into this game, likely with no Aaron Jones. Patrick Taylor just rejoining the team. It should be a lot of snaps for Jones, but he didn't do much with that when Jones is out before. 15.3 carries per game with no Jones, 0.7 targets, and 57.3 yards from scrimmage per game. His red zone share is 23.3%. So what are you doing here with A.J. Dillon? $6,600 in a spot where they're underdogs, pretty big underdogs. It's a pretty good rush defense on the opposing side. We've seen him be pretty flawed when in a featured role in the past. What are you doing with Dillon this week?
Yeah, he's really difficult to navigate because is he ever going to burn us? Like, even on a 3-game slate?
I don't know.
At a certain point, like the opportunity and the role, with the offense not being an offense that I particularly love.
Yeah.
There's just a pretty narrow path for Dillon to get to 20 points.
Yeah.
You talked about how you are not really elevating like a floor at this point.
Right.
On a 3-game slate. I think Dillon is probably going to be in a lot of optimizers.
Mm-hmm.
That's different than saying I actively want to play him.
Correct.
I think I can do better.
Correct.
With the Seahawks, so
correct. And like he's also $600 short of Tony Pollard.
Well,
I know. I know. You're right. But like Brian Robinson is 67. Even if we assume Antonio Gibson plays, like Robinson might have a better path to upside than Dillon does. Even if Gibson plays. Yeah. Because like if we look at the games that Robinson has played with Gibson, he's still at 74 yards per game, yards in scrimmage, and Dillon's at 57 in the games without Aaron Jones. So honestly, even if Gibson plays, I think you can make a case for putting Robinson above him. I might not make that case just because like I really want the snaps Dillon will play, but like I might just skip over both, honestly, in that scenario. Like if I have one lineup, I can guarantee you Dillon will not be in that lineup. That's how I'd phrase it.
Yeah, and you would think his red zone role would be really good, especially without Aaron Jones, but it's not.
It's not. No. So I'd like to be underweight here on Dillon if I can.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a lineup where you assume the Packers win this game, sure, put him in there. That's a great script for him, and he's probably contributing, but that will not be my baseline assumption. The pass catchers are low salaried pretty much across the board. Romeo Doubs, 62, Jaden Reed, 59, Christian Watson, 56. If you look at the games they've played with all those guys healthy, Doubs leads with a 19% target share. He's at 38 yards per game in that span. Christian Watson, 15.8% target share, 36 yards per game. Jaden Reed is a 13% target share, so a very low number, but 54.6 yards from scrimmage per game. And he gets a lot of like creative red zone looks, which can lead to a lot of touchdowns. So of that trio, I'd lean towards Reed, even though his workload is kind of the worst of the three. But what about you? What's your read on the pass catchers here? Dobbs, Reed, and Watson.
Yeah, I don't really have a read.
Boo.
Well, they're kind of different roles. Like I feel probably safest with Dobbs. If you want to put any stock into like, a past game, it was a different circumstances, but he got 13 targets in their first matchup. Again, different situation. But I'm having a hard time with Christian Watson.
Yeah.
Because we saw him last year be really hyper efficient to the point that he wasn't necessarily going to continue. But he's also not getting a lot of volume. And I gave him like, even if you look at since week 5, once his role, because he came back and was like limited, and then his role kind of was like fine. He leads the team, but he's got a 16% target share. He gets downfield work in terms of air yardage, but it's similar to Dylan in a very different context where like I don't want to put him in my main lineup.
Yeah.
I don't really want to put any of these guys in my main lineup, but I see the case for playing them.
Yeah.
Especially whenever I'm playing Gibbs and Montgomery. So I'm not going to go so far as to call anyone necessarily game stacks only, although I probably will put that moniker on some people. I kind of feel like I want the pass catchers here to be game stacks only because the market shares are dispersed.
Yeah.
And it's not like a Chiefs situation where the efficiency is really good.
Right.
So again, the odds that one of the three of these guys burns us is actually, I feel like it's kind of fairly high, but the odds of picking the right one and actually having like a ceiling game, that just diminishes a lot. So I'd probably rather play Musgrave as a pass catcher. We got to talk about Laporta too, but any strong feelings about the receivers?
I do think Reed is pretty
strong.
interesting just because like the way they use him.
Sure. But so do you think he's like a one lineup?
Oh, definitely
target?
not. No, I don't want it.
Right.
No part. But of the three, he'd be my favorite. Just because again, I think they want him involved and they want the ball in his hands, which I value personally. I thought that'd be the case with Watson, but it honestly hasn't been.
Right.
The case for Watson is that he's the lowest salary of the three, which is kind of shocking, I think. And he does lead in deep targets in that time, 33%. I looked at all the games and probably should have done the same sample as you did. But like all the games, 33% deep target share. Dobbs, 19.6%. Reed, 17.4%. Pretty good red zone share for Watson too, but I think Reed's talented. I like the way they use him, so I would lean there, but I think it's between... I don't know. It's tough. So let's talk about the tight ends here. Luke Musgrave, $5,000. Tucker Kraft got a bit more work this past week, but Musgrave has been on the field a lot. His salary is $5,000. Preference for you between Musgrave and Logan Thomas if you're spending down a tight end?
Probably Thomas because I just like the offense more.
I agree. What about Sam Laporta? Is he a priority for you at 65 in a slate where we're going to be trying to get to guys like CeeDee Lamb, Christian McCaffrey, and Dak Prescott?
It's really difficult. I'd love to have a good amount of Laporta and Kittle, just so I don't have to worry about the fear of missing out on guys who can get you 65 yards and a touchdown, which it's probably these two among the tight ends. But I'm not going to prioritize a tight end at a high salary. The opportunity cost is too great to pass up on McCaffrey, Lamb, and then as we get into this next game, we'll have to talk about how Dak stacks up against the other quarterbacks. So,
and are you more likely to use Laporta or Kittle among the high salary guys?
Probably Kittle because he'll be harder to get to.
I agree. Okay, quarterback Jordan Love, $7,200. Jared Goff, $7,800. The script worries me with Goff. I would still be okay using him, obviously, because like it's a 3-game slate. But well below Dak for me. I think he's probably below Brock Purdy too, honestly, which is weird for me. And then will you get to Jordan Love? Let's say you have 20 lineups. Is Jordan Love in any of them?
No, for me, 20 lineups isn't enough to play every quarterback. And I think I mean, you can talk to me about Love versus Geno. So I guess
I'd rank him above Geno because at least he's indoors and healthier.
Yeah,
but
you're right. I was gonna say,
but
if
he's
not
below
for that,
Howell. He's below Howell for me.
Oh yeah. If I'm playing 20 lineups, playing 5 quarterbacks means roughly 4 lineups per quarterback. Like if you just want to play it, I want to maximize like when I get things right. And spreading out quarterbacks. I wouldn't even necessarily play 4 or 5 quarterbacks in 20 lineups on a main slate.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to mix it up to this degree. So no Love for me. And if he burns me by putting up 30 points, great.
Yeah.
Like I'll enjoy the show. But it's more likely that he'll have an impact if he has 20 and nobody else has more than 25. But then at that rate, I could just play anybody else too.
Yeah, for sure. Any final thoughts for you on this game?
Can we quickly talk about defenses? Because this game has interesting defenses where the salaries are moderate. And then I think we kind of need to talk about how to handle defense because it's really hard to figure out. If you look at this, if these defenses in the context of the full slate, they're basically 3rd and 4th in salary. And so it's like, are you going to play the Seahawks defense or the Commanders defense?
I mean, at some point probably, but I think if I have one lineup, it'll probably be the Lions if I had to guess.
Okay, because the Packers defense comes into play then too.
Sure,
they are underdogs, probably going to face a run-heavy game script, but I just wanted to ask because it's a lot easier if you can get an extra 1,000 or 700 by playing like the Seahawks or Commanders, and then if not, do you think the Packers have enough leverage in a potential game script like this, or should we more or less be trying to get the Lions in every lineup?
So like the way I do defense is probably not optimal, but like I just put in the defense.
This is why I'm asking.
So I know like how much I have to play with. So I'll put like I have a defense that I put in at a lowish salary, not like the lowest I'll go, but like a lowish salary. And then if I have more to spend up, I will. But like the Lions will be that default defense this week is what I'm saying.
Because I did the same thing. I was like, I did the Packers. I was like, I could see myself living with the Packers, but again, I don't think we have to talk about defenses much more than that. It depends on who else is in your lineup, but it's a matter of if you're going to play the Commanders, you got more wiggle room. If you want to try to get to the Lions or above, then it does make a tangible change in like your lineup construction. So I just wanted to ask about that before I moved on.
For sure. Good question. Okay, let's move now to the second game and talk about the Commanders at the Cowboys, where right now the Cowboys are 10.5-point favorites at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total in this game is 48.5. Couple key injuries in this game. The big one, at least I think, is Antonio Gibson. Limited practice on Monday. He had a toe injury which forced him out in week 11, and Brian Robinson was a featured back with no Gibson. Rico Dowdle also missed practice, or was limited. He didn't. I don't think he actually practiced. He missed practice Monday with an ankle injury. He practiced in full with an ankle injury all last week and did wind up playing. So I bet he's good to go. I want to check just to make sure he actually did not practice here for a second. Yeah, didn't practice at all. Okay, interesting. So I think that is pretty noteworthy, honestly, for Rico Dowdle not practicing on Monday. So let's start things off here by talking about the Robinson thing. I don't think that's the headliner in this game necessarily, but I think that's more so the Cowboys passing offense. But let's say we get a situation where Robinson is playing without Gibson, hypothetically, because it seems like Gibson probably trending towards playing right now. If that does happen, how do you view Robinson relative to the rest of the slate?
If there's no Gibson?
Yeah.
Probably just someone I would play in every lineup or close to it.
Yeah. I think he'd be as big of a priority as Zach Charbonnet at $5,800.
Yeah. Which sounds like then, okay, I'm playing 2 of the same running backs in every lineup. But look, if you can get great workloads at reasonable salaries for guys who have talent and, in Robinson's case, can get targets, which they're probably going to throw the ball a lot again this week, I think you just take it and don't necessarily overthink it, especially compared to the rest of the slate at running back. Christian McCaffrey we'll get to. You want to play him if you can. We already talked about the Lions running backs. They're great, but it's hard to get to like CeeDee Lamb or Amon-Ra St. Brown if you want to do that, or one of the better tight ends. If you can just, and then there's Tony Pollard, who is fine, but it's not like his salary is just a screaming value either. So
Yeah.
if you can get two really good workloads and compare that to like AJ Dillon, who's as fine of a play as could be, I think you just take it. So I'd be really, really high on Robinson without Gibson. With Gibson, though, what are you thinking?
Viable for game stacks, but not a priority by any means. I think that's what I would say.
So I don't want to jump ahead too much here, but I think this is a good game because we already talked about one game with 3 viable running backs to some degree. This game has 2, maybe 3 if you want to consider Antonio Gibson,
I do not.
Which I don't. But like, how are you viewing running back in terms of prioritization at this point?
Charbonnet 1, McCaffrey 2, and both will be in my main, if I have one lineup, both will be in it, I think.
But nobody else necessarily jumps out. We would put the Lions guys there by default, but it's really difficult to say you're going to play McCaffrey and Jahmyr Gibbs in the same lineup.
There will be multiple tiers between them. If there's no Gibson, Robinson is in that same tier for me, and I would just use all 3 in the same lineup.
Correct.
That's like my main lineup, and I would just call it a day, which means no Pollard, but like that's okay. Personally, because I'm expecting a pretty pass-heavy script here for the Cowboys. They're 10-point favorites, but like when they were facing the Giants, they were still shredding through the air. And I think that's very noteworthy for how they may play things in this matchup, especially because like the Commanders are a team that is pretty bad against the pass. They rank 29th right now based on numberFire's metrics, and that includes before they traded away Montez Sweat and Chase Young. The Cowboys have been very pass heavy since their bye, and we know where the ball is going. That's CeeDee Lamb. So I don't know. I don't know why I was going with that, but like that's why. Like I think that's why I'm prioritizing McCaffrey and Charbonnet over Pollard, is because I expect the Cowboys to be pretty pass heavy in this. That's what I was going for. Pretty pass heavy in the spot.
I think to me, like Pollard, you can't really discuss him without discussing the rest of the running backs. I think the other guys you kind of can.
Yeah.
But for some reason, for Pollard, for me, probably because he's in the middle in terms of salary and also kind of expectations and just general performance and efficiency.
Mid.
If you don't think you're gonna like play McCaffrey and the Detroit guys, and you're gonna kind of go the opposite way, I think Pollard in a vacuum is a fine play, but I don't think he does enough to overcome McCaffrey or either Detroit guy from a process standpoint. If you want to get there, the way that I kind of look at running back at this point is you want to start with the lowest salary. Like work your way. We used to work our way from the top down.
Yeah.
Now I kind of want to work from the bottom up and say, who do I absolutely like want to play? It's Charbonnet if there's no Walker, of course. Robinson without Gibson, if we can get there. Jim's just out here building a whole lineup.
I was trying to see if I could do Lamb plus Brown plus Dak if I went with the 3 mid-range backs. Like if there were no Gibson, going Pollard, Robinson, and Charbonnet. And you can technically, but then you're out here using like Juwan Jennings, Jalen Tolbert, something like that. So
you could also change your defense.
I could not,
which is exactly what I was. That's exactly why I wanted to bring it up.
I'm not gonna.
You're not gonna play any Packers.
I will, but not in this one.
Okay. So
actually, I should just go Seahawks because like I've got Charbonnet, old Charbs in there, and no McCaffrey. So I guess that's doable. So you can make it happen, and I think it's worth looking into at least.
Yeah. But that's not necessarily how I want to view it, because I think McCaffrey's going to have a great game. And so we really have 2 premier running backs on the board.
Assuming that Gibson plays, yes.
Assuming Gibson plays, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree. Let's talk about the Cowboys passing game here. And I think, like, if we're talking about like overall priorities for studs, it's a really hard decision to go between McCaffrey and Lamb because McCaffrey's salary is $9,800. Lamb is 92. If you force me to pick, I'm probably picking McCaffrey. But like, again, I really would like to get both because I think that relative to the rest of the slate, these two guys are standouts. I expect the 49ers to be run heavy. I expect the Cowboys to be pass heavy, and that lends itself to both these guys. So having a hard time here, but I think that to me, Brandon, illustrates how high I am on the Cowboys passing attack. So that's where I get to here. What are your thoughts overall on the Cowboys passing attack here against Washington?
Yeah, and I weirdly think like Lamb might be harder to replace than McCaffrey
Sure.
because we're talking, you know, I come at it from a pessimistic angle with like the running backs and why I don't want to love Tony Pollard or AJ Dillon, but like you have options. With Lamb, if we kind of just assume that Amon-Ra St. Brown and the Lions are a little more run heavy, and the same for Brand. I've really reversed course on Brandon Ayuk. So shout out fellow Brandon, but like Lamb is kind of in a tier of his own, and I'm hoping that like as favorites, people just don't quite like the Cowboys passing offense as much.
I think
Pollard
this helps
scored
a lot.
and that helps
38
too.
yards against Carolina last week. Like it was kind of one of those we were hoping that it'd happen. He's still going to be very popular. Like I'm not going to try to sugarcoat it, but I think he'll be less popular than he should be as a result of finally cooling off last week.
So I think it's safe to say that Charbonnet is going to be someone in a heavy majority, if not all of our lineups.
Correct.
Let's say you're building 10 lineups total and you have some added value because Charbonnet's in there. How many of those are having McCaffrey? How many are having Lamb? How many have both? And how many have none? You can also expand it beyond 10 if you want to do 100 to make it easier. But
I don't think I'll have a lineup without one of them.
Okay.
If it's 10, maybe if it's more. I would probably want like 6 McCaffrey, 6 Lamb with 2 of overlap there. Then is that 2 or is that's 1 overlap, right? 1 overlap.
You did 6 and 6, didn't you?
Yeah.
I don't know how many lineups you're building.
10.
I was just trying to ask you like
10, so but I have one of them in every single lineup. So like if I have 6 McCaffrey, that would be 1 overlap, right? 6 of each.
Well, you could just say like because I'm asking like would you do 3 with just McCaffrey, 3 with just Lamb, 2 with both, and 2 with 0.
Oh, 5, 4. No, man. 4 with just McCaffrey, 4 with just Lamb, 2 with both. How about that? There we go. Okay, right?
That I just wanted
nailed
to
it
get
first time. Nailed it. Woo! Party.
Good thing this isn't a lot. We can cut that in post.
No. Raw, unfiltered, stupid content. The Heat Check Fantasy Podcast.
I'm with you where like I want one of these guys in both of my, like in all of my lineups. I want to be open to both because I think that it's going to be hard to be truly unique. It's really hard to leave a lot of salary on the table to try to get like a truly unique lineup in a tournament. But playing the 2 highest salaried guys together, even if they're both popular singularly, share like you're going to kind of cut down on that.
Correct.
Especially if you were like not to play Charbonnet, which I'm not necessarily like advocating, but like there are ways to play popular plays and change it up a bit.
Right. And basically you're taking the CD Lamb lineups and trimming it down by X when you put McCaffrey in there as well.
Yeah.
And I think that's a pretty attractive proposition, personally. If you go with Charbonnet plus McCaffrey plus Lamb, you're at 58-67 left. Plug in, we'll say the Lions defense. I know you can go lower, but like, let's just say that. 62-50. So like, it's not easy. You're making consolation somewhere, but I think with guys like Jackson Smith and Jigba, Logan Thomas, Jameson Williams, we can make that work. And I might try to jam in both my primary lineup. Personally,
I just don't know if you're like glossing over a lot by
Right.
doing that,
Right. I
which
agree.
is what makes me that's what makes it appealing to me.
Like,
Now,
is
of
the
course,
mid-range attractive to you?
at either position, not in particular.
Yeah, I agree.
The caveat being the Lions running backs.
Yeah, but like I don't need them in my primary lineup, I don't think. So
Sure.
I think I do want to jam in both personally. Lamb, since the bye week for the Cowboys, has a 34% target share with a 44% deep rate and a 32% red zone target share. That's absurd. It's really good. And it's led to upside for Dak Prescott too. They're at home in this matchup. $8,500. Will Dak be in your primary lineup, or do you jump down in order to make it easier to get to McCaffrey with Lamb in that one lineup? I think Brock Purdy is a fine consolation prize. If I need to, if I'm going to come off of one of those three guys, I am most likely to come off of Dak more so than McCaffrey or Lamb.
I mean, can you play?
You can play all three, yes.
Okay.
I sent you a lineup this morning with it.
Okay.
Check your DMs on Slack. That was
Let
with the
me look
Lions
here.
defense, by the way, just for the record.
Okay. Again, my preference would be the Lions, but it's more a matter of
Yeah,
are you willing just to
for
punt
sure.
at defense to play? And it's really easy to do that time and time and time again, but that
Right.
might be bad process.
Right.
So my simulations for the week for this slate have Dak around 37% to have the most FanDuel points among the quarterbacks, which isn't surprising. But Purdy's at 20%. I think that historically for us, Purdy hasn't had enough of a ceiling. That's changing a bit, which is fun. And so it does make it easier to sort of go away from Dak. If I felt lower on Purdy's ceiling, I'd have a hard time going away from Dak. I'd rather play like value receivers than punt at quarterback to overlook Dak, but I think it's a little bit easier with Purdy. So I want to play Dak in my primary lineup. I just wonder if that's going to push me sort of to the brink where I have Dak. So I basically have the QB1, the RB1, and the wide receiver one, but don't really love the rest of my lineup.
Yeah. You can make it work, but it is a chore. And I think that I'd be okay pivoting down to Purdy from Dak if I need the flexibility at quarterback. Let's talk about the potential value plays in this game, which means every pass catcher on the Commanders, but also Brandon Cooks. Cooks had the big game against the Giants. We look at them since the bye week, just a 13% target share for Cooks with 19% of the deep targets, but he's at home, which is good. He did show a path to upside in that game. And like he hasn't been bad beyond that game either recently since he got back from that knee injury. So are you willing to use Brandon Cooks as a salary saver here? Do you prefer guys like Jahan Dotson and Curtis Samuel? Or what's your read on the value pass catchers here?
Yeah, I'd rather get to Cooks because I think the passing efficiency will be better, even if the passing volume might be a little bit lower.
Mm-hmm.
Although I think it'll probably be somewhat comparable just because these two teams are really pass heavy. Or at least want to be pass heavy. Cooks indoors as a favorite with a great implied team total makes a lot of sense. His route rate spiked back up. We've historically liked Michael Gallup on the pod when he was healthier.
It's over.
But that's over with.
Yeah.
So for me, Cooks, I can't say this for certain, but Cooks is probably the best value receiver on the slate, right?
So you'd rank him above Jameson Williams, Christian Watson, Jaden Reed?
Yeah.
Jackson Smith and Jigba as well. Probably. I think so.
He's
right?
he's going to be the second option on a really good passing offense versus second or third, or maybe first in the case of like Watson, but it's a modified first if he's got like a 16.4% target share to lead the team.
Yeah.
So again, they're all in play, but I'd probably lean Cooks, and he would help get Dak a lot easier too.
I think so too. And I think the second one for me is Logan Thomas. Salary $5,200, which is a big part of why I'd like to get to Logan Thomas. If we look at the games where Thomas has played full games, they played 7 full games with Curtis Samuel not getting ejected and healthy, with Logan Thomas not getting like dirty hit against him in Denver, stuff like that. In those games, McLaurin does lead with a 22% target share, but then all three of the other guys have exactly a 15.8% target share. It is comical how similar their workloads are. Thomas both has the lowest salary and fills tight end among those secondary guys. So I think Thomas, he also has more yards in scrimmage than both Samuel and Dotson in that time. So that's why I go Thomas. But how are you viewing Thomas, Dotson, and Samuel here?
I feel similarly to this trio as I do the Packers trio, but I like it more
because they seem to trust their quarterback more, for better or worse.
Yeah. I like this game more as a potential back and forth game.
Yeah.
So that's also factoring into why I'm a little bit lower on someone like Christian Watson.
Mm-hmm.
But Logan Thomas, definitely don't mind playing him in the tight end slot. I'm not against just bringing him back with any of the viable Commanders receivers, especially when I'm playing Dak and Cooks, because at that rate, I'm just going for the back and forth game. Where does Thomas rank for you on the full slate of tight ends? Do you think he's someone that you would consider in your single lineup?
He probably will be in there, if I'm being honest, because I'm so determined to get to Lamb with McCaffrey that I need to spend down at tight end. And if we're comparing Logan Thomas to Luke Musgrave, Noah Fant, other lower salary tight ends, I think that Thomas is pretty easily number one. So I think he's pretty likely to be in my primary lineup, not because I like him, but because of what he gets me.
Yeah. Any strong feelings on the Commanders wide receivers?
I prefer Samuel, I think, over Dotson. Like, I like Jahan Dotson as a talent, but like, it's very clear he's not getting a lot of work from them. And Samuel does at least get like somewhat creative touches. He's been pretty bad ever since he had that toe injury. Practiced in full on Monday and then got ejected last week, obviously. But like, I don't know. I feel like people will be a lot more likely to use Dotson than to use Samuel. And I think that Dotson's workload when Samuel is healthy is very, very flimsy. So I don't know. What about you?
I don't feel particularly great, which is why they're not going to be someone that I don't want to. I don't even on a 3-game slate. I don't want to get to the point where I play someone I don't like.
Right.
So I'm going to try to work around things. I like Brandon Cooks well enough because I see the routes being up. I see him as the secondary option there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why he stands out way more to me than guessing at the Commanders in terms of a single lineup.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm going to stack this game a lot. I don't want to like overlook Terry McLaurin.
Sure.
Because he's probably going to, it's going to be hard to get into lineups just at that sort of awkward salary. The role has been better than the rest of them, but still not great. So that's probably more for like a Lamb lineup without McCaffrey, though.
It also could be for a Sam Howell lineup. Will you consider Sam Howell at quarterback, $7,300? Let's compare him to Goff, because I think we both agree that it's Dak 1, Purdy 2.
Mm-hmm.
How many lineups do you need to get to Sam Howell?
Probably like 20.
I might need a little bit less than that, honestly.
Yeah, I get.
Because they're very run heavy. He thinks very highly of his athleticism.
Very pass heavy.
What's that?
Very pass heavy.
He thinks very highly of his athleticism. Pass heavy. Sorry. I thought you misheard me. Yes, they are very pass heavy. So, and they're indoors. It's going to be a pass heavy script as well. So, I might be more likely to use Howell than Goff, honestly.
I think so too.
Okay, cool. Any final thoughts for you on this game?
Talked running backs. I think we're good.
We didn't talk Jake Ferguson.
Is this your favorite game?
Yes, it is.
Is there any other game close?
49ers Seahawks is close.
I don't think that's as close for me because
it's a tier below, but like I shouldn't say close. But yeah.
I think there's a chance that one is not super competitive.
I mean, they could all be not super competitive. There's a 7-point spread in all of them. This is actually the closest spread. Just saying. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about the 49ers at the Seahawks. For right now, the 49ers are 7-point favorites. The total is 43.5. It was 42.5 this morning, but it's gone up a point, which I will happily take because I've got this at 47. What could go wrong with that? In this game, Geno Smith sounds like he should be good to go. He has a tricep issue. Pete Carroll said it's not like he's trending in the right direction. Geno did not practice, though, on Monday, which is noteworthy. Or estimated as a non-participant since they had a walkthrough. Kenneth Walker likely to sit due to an oblique injury. So let's start with the headliner in this game, which to me is Zach Charbonnet, and talk through our views of him. Charbonnet, Brandon, salary of $5,800. How big of a priority is he compared to the rest of the slate for you?
Yeah, I think on a full like 10-game, 12-game slate, I would play him in virtually every lineup, even though the matchup is really difficult. And I don't know. I'm not sold that this game is absolutely going to be close. I think this is probably the most likely game to be a blowout, just the way that I view it. If your quarterback is injured and you're playing a really, really good team with a good defense, it can get away from you. That's just kind of how I see this one. So I'm a little bit low on this one. All that to be said, I don't know how I'm going to build lineups without Charbonnet this week for the Thanksgiving slate.
Yeah, I think I agree. Just because, like, I talked about this on the recap show yesterday, but like, he's the exact kind of value running back you want, where they were using him before the starter got hurt. He gets work in the passing game. He's going to get work in the red zone as well. It is a very tough matchup, but like, teams have been somewhat able to run on the 49ers this year. They rank 19th against the rush based on numberFire's metrics. Now, they don't run against them. Like, they have faced the second highest pass rate on early downs this year, but part of that's game script too. So they've been getting a bit worse against the rush. You can run the ball against them. Even if they don't run, he'll still be involved via the passing game. So, like we say the 10 lineup thing, I think he'd be in all 10 personally.
Yeah.
I feel pretty firm in saying that.
I do too. I didn't realize that he had been out snapping Kenneth Walker.
He had, part of it was like, one of them was Walker was banged up going to one of the games. The second was a blowout. And then I think it was a game that he got hurt after that. So there was some flukiness in there, but yeah, he had been.
Yeah, I just don't envision a situation where like his role is bad, and you couldn't really convince me that. Like, you could convince me the logic behind not playing Charbonnet and instead playing AJ Dillon from a game theory standpoint.
Yeah,
but from a process standpoint,
correct.
You could not do that.
Fully agree. So let's talk the other headliner in this game, which is Christian McCaffrey, $9,800. 10 lineups. How many?
6.
I think that's where I'm at too. Looking at the games where they've had all their guys healthy, which means Debo, Ayuk, Kittle, and I'm omitting the middle part of the year where Debo is banged up. In those games, McCaffrey is at 137.3 yards from scrimmage per game. He had a 60% red zone share, and that's with all their dudes healthy. It's absurd numbers. And Seattle has been better against the rush this year than they were last year, but they still rank 20th based on numberFire's metrics. They face about a league average pass rate in early downs, but I think that the 49ers will be willing and able to run the ball against the Seahawks via McCaffrey. So I would say 6 for me as well with McCaffrey, just because like his workload is too good. His red zone share is too good. I don't want to pass up that personally.
Yeah. And, we don't, or at least I don't do a lot of standings watching or anything, but, San Francisco 7-3, Seattle 6-4.
It's a very big game.
It's a big game. I mean, it's a 1-win difference, but San Francisco has a point differential of plus 122 and the Seahawks are -2, which again, this just speaks to like, could you sell me on like why you don't think this game is likely to turn into a sort of a rout?
I mean, like, I think they're all likely to. Like, they're all somewhat
like
likely
this game
to.
in particular, like,
well, because Seattle is the dog that's at home of the 3. And
yes,
so like that gives them some extra boost. Like that's literally like, it's also the tightest spread. I'm not being weird by saying that I think this game could be like closer than the other ones.
I'm not saying that it won't be, or this is the game I'm most fearful of, is just like a complete, like, San Francisco just like blows the doors off of Seattle.
Right.
That's just how I'm viewing it. I know in Seattle that's less likely. Seattle's been good at home, 4-1, but like I think San Francisco is really, really good.
Yeah.
Gino's coming off of a triceps injury on a short week. I don't love their offense that much.
So
And
I want to
like,
ask you what the implication of that is. Like, does it mean you're not using Charbonnet? Does it mean you're not using McCaffrey? What does it mean?
no, it just means that like the pass catchers, the bringbacks, like I'm kind of lower on it. So like it
Oh
makes
yeah.
me like the idea of like Gino less. And I
Oh, I
just
don't
kind
like
of said it in passing where like I think this game is like McCaffrey's gonna get his.
yeah.
But I kind of worry about the rest of the game a
So let's
little
talk about the
bit.
rest of the game. Break down those pass catchers. I think your concerns are valid, but it's valid for every game on this slate, given the
Sure.
spreads. But I think the reason for me, we wind up in the same place, but via different routes. The reason why I'm not super likely to be high on Debo, Ayuk, Metcalf, Lockett, etc., is because I'm going to be very stars and scrubs this week, and they're all in the mid range for that discussion. So if I am prioritizing McCaffrey, prioritizing Lamb, it's going to be hard to get to those guys.
Yeah.
So we're getting to the same route, but via different paths. Like I'll be lower on them as well, but because they're not as big of priorities for me as the studs are, and they're not low enough salary to be focal points like Charbonnet.
I'm gonna play how many lineups game?
Mm.
How many lineups would it take for you to go away from your core process and like build lineups around like Purdy, like do a double stack of like Purdy and then two of Ayuk, Samuel, or Kittle, and like just kind of do things completely differently?
Not a ton, just because like that would be a non-McCaffrey lineup, so I'd have more flexibility to get
Okay,
there.
but
I
then
do.
not CD Lamb as well. I'd be
Mm,
surprised if you could play. I mean, I guess you probably could. Okay, let's do it.
am I going Ayuk or Samuel here? I
It
like Ayuk more.
dealer's choice.
Yeah, Kittle. Okay, let's put Charbonnet at the I guess not guaranteed. Devin are running back in the flex, and then let's open things up. Let's go to the Detroit defense. Okay, so if I do that, I've got this is a Purdy, Charbonnet, Ayuk, Kittle, Detroit Lions team. 68-75 left. Let's go CeeDee Lamb. Let's go. Oh boy, we're getting down there. So I would need to use two value receivers.
Right.
And like I'm okay with that. So not a ton.
You are?
Yeah, fine.
Okay.
Yeah, because that's basically Cooks, which means I have Lamb, Cooks, and Pollard, and then Jameson Williams. So I can get to that.
Okay.
So not a ton because I'll use Purdy. I think Purdy's probably gonna be my number 2 quarterback above
Yeah.
Howell and above Goff. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's shown some ceiling, and I don't think it's like fluky either. He's been good enough for long enough that I'm just kind of not going to second guess it in any sense. His passing efficiency is really, really good when you adjust for opponents faced.
He's at
It's really
0.39 in those 4 games with those 4 guys, and I don't think that's fluky.
yeah. So
like he scored
if I
26 FanDuel points on 25 attempts last week.
this is like Russell Wilson classic stuff.
Yeah.
And again, you're basically just betting against Dak going for like 30 or 35, which if Dak, has a great passing game and has a rushing touchdown, sure. But you're not really comparing him to the elite running quarterbacks or like the superstar quarterbacks. So I would not be disappointed if I go down to Purdy in my main lineup from Dak.
I wouldn't either. Let's say I force you to use one of Debo, Ayuk, or Kittle, considering salary. Which of them would you use if forced to use one of them?
Kittle.
Okay, pitch me on it.
From a projection standpoint, he is clearly like the most likely tight end to lead the slate. Let me see what I got here. I have him 40% likely to be the highest scoring tight end on the slate. Of course, that doesn't account for salary. But if I account for salary, I have him at 26% likely to be the best tight end value on the slate. if you told me that a tight end's going for, I don't know, let's see, 149 yards or 116 yards and a touchdown or 89 yards and a touchdown, it's going to be George Kittle over
Yeah.
anyone else.
Yeah.
The opportunity cost of Kittle having 18 or 19 FanDuel points, it gets really tricky to replace that if no tight end has more than like 9 or 10 FanDuel points. Again, salary counts for, you got to account for the salary and everything, and you got to make sure you're hitting on your other options and make sure that the value required to get to Kittle actually does something too. But I do think that with someone with tangible yardage upside and like a good chance to score, I don't love that he scored 2 games in a row, but
He also had
I think I go Kittle.
this was with no Debo, but he had 149 yards, no touchdowns in a game. Like, that's really hard to do. I would still probably go towards the pass catchers personally, just because I like Samuel's salary a lot and I like
Sure.
Ayuk's yardage upside. But like, I think the case for Kittle is very fair and very clean. So I get it. I understand it for sure.
What about the Seattle pass catchers then?
Yeah, I don't know, man. I'm just not gonna be like, it's just the salary range that I don't really envision myself being in all that much. Between them, I like DK a lot more than I like Lockett.
Yeah.
But Jackson Smith and Jigba is like, I think, a viable value play. We both prefer Jameson Williams by a bit and probably prefer Brandon Cooks, but like, I'm going to use a lot of these guys. So Smith and Jigba, if you look at the games he's played with DK since the bye week, 15% target share, 17% of the deep targets, and 14% red zone share. He had 4 deep targets the entire year, and then had 4 this past week, 2 with Drew Lock, who is an animal. But like, he had 2 from Geno as well. So I think they're trusting him a bit more downfield. So honestly, if you tell me, like, ask me which receiver I wind up with the most exposure to between this group, it might actually be Smith and Jigba, just because the salary is so low.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. DK's really underperformed in recent weeks. If you look at from week 8 on, he's got a catch rate over expectation of minus 10.3 percentage points. Like JSN, Lockett have overperformed in that category. There are a few names that really scare me on the slate. Ayuk is one of them. Kittle is one of them. DK Metcalf is another one of them, because it's going to be really hard to get to DK Metcalf in primary lineups.
Yeah.
Especially if I'm trying to force in Lamb and McCaffrey.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of thinking like McCaffrey and Metcalf make a lot of sense.
Sure.
So if I'm really that sold on McCaffrey, I should probably feel good about DK to some degree. I just kind of I don't know. I just kind of worry about a quarterback who's hurt and playing a tough defense. And I like Geno a lot, but he hasn't been playing as well as he played last year.
Been about average. Yeah.
He's been fine.
Yeah. They've been very good in early downs. They've been hideous in late downs. Like, they are, I think, 4th in early down passing efficiency, which is nuts. So they've been really bad on late downs, which matters. Like, doesn't mean it's fluky, but like, when they've been willing to throw in early downs, they've been good. And again, teams have thrown against the 49ers at a pretty heavy rate. Hufanga's out for this game for the 49ers via torn ACL. So like, there's a path. So I think that, like, if you're saying you have the FOMO with Metcalf and potentially Ayuk, let's say you have 5 single entry lineups, I would set aside one of the 5 to just stack the daylights out of this game and do that as a way to kind of safeguard yourself. I think that might be your route. So it's lower exposure, but like, if DK goes off, it's a lot more likely this game is a shootout. So I think that's the way I would circumvent it, is set aside one of my single entry lineups to game stack this one, to kind of give myself a safeguard in case it does wind up being good.
So since week 8, when Metcalf came back, he's averaging 5.8 downfield targets per game. I mentioned the catch rate over expectation being low. There's a lot of unrealized potential in those. I just don't know, like, if I love the idea of Geno connecting on them finally once he's hurt and playing still a good defense. But maybe I need to be higher on Metcalf. Maybe that's, we're talking about defaulting to like a lot of Smith and Jigba, but maybe the real play is to make sure we got DK. Or am I too high on DK now based on all that?
No, his salary 7,000. He has upside,
Yeah.
like yardage upside. In the games that I mentioned before, the Smith and Jigba sample where he's played with DK since the bye, DK has a 27% target share with 40% of the deep targets and 52% inside the red zone. Like, no, I think you're fine being high on him. It's more so a roster construction that leads me away. But if it's a lineup with no Lamb, I think that I'm pretty likely to get, like, I could see DK in there for sure. Like, let's say mid-range receiver. Let's say we deviate from the stars and scrubs approach. We don't have CD, we don't have Metcalf, something like that. Who are you most likely to use between McLaurin, Lockett, Debo, Metcalf, and Ayuk?
I mean, Ayuk if I can.
Over DK?
Yeah, but it's not a super fair comparison due to the salary.
Sure.
But I have much higher offensive expectations for Ayuk.
Mm-hmm.
But Metcalf over the rest of them.
Okay. I would agree with that part as well.
And I got to ask, I never get Debo right. I don't think I've ever gotten Debo right in my life. Where should I be on him this week?
Don't mind him as a way, like, if you wind up in that range, like, will it break my heart to use Debo over like McLaurin or Lockett? No. He just hasn't had the same like burst this year. I don't know if he's still banged up or what it is, but like it hasn't been the same. I mentioned before a 4-game sample, even if I omit the games where Debo is banged up in the middle part of the year, in that span, 71.3 yards from scrimmage per game. You know, it's fine. He does lead in target share in that sample at 23%, but Ayuk is at 95.8 yards per game. Whereas again, Debo's 71.3. So like he's fine. If I wind up there, I'll rank him above Lockett and McLaurin, but not a priority for me right now. I would like rank Metcalf above him as well.
So this is a tricky one to do for certain players and stuff. But since week 8, when DK came back, I mentioned the 5.8 downfield targets per game. He is trailing just Tank Dell, which is awesome.
The physique of those two being like 1 and 3 or whatever on this list is phenomenal.
CD Lamb is at 6.3, and then Ayuk is at 5.7.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of downfield targets on this slate.
Yeah, I'll take it. I'll definitely take it. Any final thoughts for you on this game or on this slate in general?
I think we covered this one.
Yeah, I agree. I think that really what it comes down to is deciding if you want to go all in on Charbonnet, which we will. Not going to speak for you, but we will. And then deciding how you rank Lamb and McCaffrey and how often you want to bend over backwards to get both. I didn't talk about a Howell lineup with those two guys, but like, you could use Sam Howell to get there potentially. You can use Brock Purdy as we discussed. You can find ways to get there. I think it's worth at least trying to. So I think that how you handle McCaffrey and Lamb is the key decision point in this slate. And for me, it's just jam them in whenever I can. Like that'll be my approach to this Thursday slate. That's all that we have here for the Thanksgiving 3-game slate. But we'll be back with you once again tomorrow, once again at noon Eastern, breaking down the main slate for Sunday. Noon Eastern on the FanDuel YouTube page. If you like what you hear, leave us a thumbs up on the FanDuel YouTube page. Swing back once again tomorrow by subscribing to that page as well. You can also find these shows on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed and on FanDuel TV Plus. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, where can they find you there?
I'm on Twitter at Gdula13, GDULA13.
And I am on Twitter at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can find me on Threads at Jim.Sannes. You can find FanDuel Research on Twitter at FanDuel Research. Happy Thanksgiving to you, Brandon. Happy Thanksgiving to all of you listening as well. Good luck to you in your lineups and enjoy. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow to preview the Week 12 main slate. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.